We had one in the backyard, and then we had one in the front yard.
So are snakes kosher, Rabbi?
No, they're not. No, they're not kosher. Not only they're not kosher.
Good one, Mike.
I have a dog now, and I don't want the dog to get.
Right. Yeah, that's one thing you have to make sure
to get bit. So I am a little bit more careful. I mean, I don't want to get bit either, but they're not that big ones, but there must be a nest nearby because I had
probably because when we lived in Arizona, we had snakes not too far from us, but we never got one in our yard.
This one was definitely in the yard and also in the front yard too. So
is there someone you can call to check and see if you have a nest or anything?
I don't know. Does anybody know that? Not that I know of. I don't know if people can search for, I don't know how they would search.
I don't know.
It tastes like chicken.
They have mongoose. Does anyone have a mongoose that they rent mongoose out or something to find the snakes? I don't know. I all I know is I don't like it now with my dog. They generally will leave you alone, but dog, this is a puppy. Puppy doesn't know any better.
Right.
Gonna go chasing
out.
It's
a big lizard.
Yep. So that means the heat was it was hot enough for these guys to come out. So we actually read it in Shemini a couple of weeks ago. Things that crawl around on the ground. It didn't say specifically snakes. It didn't include them in it, but the reptiles and snakes and anything that crawls around on its belly, and essentially, anything that swarms on the earth. Which interestingly probably includes under that is where they included things like rats and rodents, things like that, which obviously are also not kosher because they don't have hooves or
right.
They're
but there were definitely serpents back in biblical times, correct?
For sure, yeah. There's a big problem in the sense that again they had snakes that could kill people. That's
why I'm surprised they actually never mentioned it in the Torah.
What snakes? Snakes are kosher or not?
Well, no, that it's mentioned at all. It's not mentioned at all anywhere, is it?
No, there is. There in Numbers, there's a story of people that were being bitten by snakes in the journey, and so they were actually cured by this statue that Moses' snake statue, if you will, that they were supposed to look at. It was a snake, and the snake was going to cure them by looking at it. By looking at it, it's in Numbers, book of Numbers. It's in right after Pinchas. It's right after Pinchas. It's like chapter 20, 21 is where snakes, the serpent story is. So it's a weird story, and it definitely is strange because according to the Bible, the Nehushtan, the snake sculpture, was still being used by people during the time of kings, and eventually it has to be destroyed because people are worshiping it as an idol. So it's a weird kind of acceptable idol, if you will, for a while, and then eventually it's not acceptable anymore. So yeah, we'll get to it in a couple months. We'll get to the
this week's Torah portion is my Torah portion.
Achrei Mot.
Yep.
Kedoshim, and it's actually a big portion. So we better.
Oh yeah, it's an important portion. We read it every year at Yom Kippur.
Read it every year at Yom Kippur, and it has a whole lot. So we better dive into it because it's a double portion this week. Next year it won't be a double portion. Next year it'll be split. This is one of the portions that only gets doubled up when you really have to, and it is big ones. It is a long one. So it
has a lot of information in it.
Yeah. Yeah. So some of the double portions, like last week's Tazria and Matzorah, are not as the portions aren't as long. This one, what's interesting about it is it contains, as Mike is saying, it contains what we read at Yom Kippur, but it also contains what we call the Holiness Code, the part of the Bible that deals with, if you will, kind of ethical behavior, a little bit of religious behavior, but really focuses on ethical behavior. And many people say it's kind of like another 10 commandment, if you will. And you'll see why when we get to it, but we better get into it because, and we're on We are on Facebook right now, and let me just make sure everything's going well with that. But we have, we got to get into it. So let me share this up on the screen here, and you'll be able to read it with us. Not yet. Okay. We're going to put this up here for everyone to see. And here we go. Achrei mode. And the words Achrei mode. It says Vayidaber Adonai el Moshe, which is again, those 4 words are the words that we have at the beginning of so many verses. The Lord spoke to Moses. And it doesn't say the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, because it actually says the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, to Moses, Achrei mot, after the death of the Shnei B'nai Aharon, the 2 sons of Aaron. So Moses speaks to Aaron after his 2 sons died. And you can understand why maybe God doesn't speak to Aaron and only to Moses, because Aaron was still very much in a state of grief after losing his son. So in Shmini, in chapter 10, we read about their death. The last few chapters we read, the double portion last week, Tazria Matzora, was into this story, the laws of keeping people safe, if you will, the kind of the medical responsibilities of the priests to quarantine and to segregate people who are either in the state of impurity, having bled, having discharged, having sarat, the skin disease. And then we come back to the story that we read before, which is the sons dying. And it's almost as if the last couple of portions, and it's not like they didn't exist, but it's almost like we turn back to that, and we kind of skip back into that narrative, that story, reminding us of that. And the Lord said to Moses, tell your brother Aaron that he is not to come at will into the shrine behind the curtain, in front of the cover that is upon the ark, lest he die, for I appear in the cloud over the cover. Thus only Aaron shall enter the shrine with a bull of the herd for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering. He shall be dressed in a sacral linen tunic, with linen breeches next to his flesh, and be girt with a linen sash, and he shall wear a linen turban. They are sacral vestments, and he shall bathe his body in water and put them on. Now, this seems different, obviously, to what he originally wore, which was a full garb with the ephod on, with the crown on, with the breastplate on. Now he's kind of going in just with this white tunic and this white underwear, and it's almost, again, just an all white uniform, if you will. And this is kind of like the underclothes, or the clothes without any fancy, nothing. They don't even have colors. And this is the process of cleansing himself so that he can come back and do his priestly duties. And again, what's so amazing is that this happened literally a week after on the 8th day after they opened up, the first day of business, because the first 7 days were all ordination period. It wasn't open for business. It was literally, you opened, had a soft opening, and then you had a chance to let the holiness of the place kind of settle in. And then on the 8th day, the first kind of full day of operation, is when everything went nuts. The sons Nadav and Avihu die, and now on as they clean up, they're like, well, what do we do now? How do we fix this? And so the first thing, again, we read 2 weeks ago, they take out the bodies. They're very careful. Aaron and his family don't even do it themselves. The cousins, the Levites, do it. And now what we read about is the rededication and the purification that will allow them to go back into doing their job. And again, we read this at Yom Kippur. We read this chapter at Yom Kippur. From the Israelite community, he shall take 2 goats, and you'll see why. He shall take 2 he-goats for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering. Aaron is to offer his own bull of sin offering to make expiation for himself and for his household. So again, there are sin offerings that he makes for the community, the priests will make, but there's also this huge offering of a bull, which is like the biggest offering, right? And that is for himself and for his household. He shall take the 2 goats and let them stand before the Lord at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And he shall place lots upon the 2 goats, one marked for the Lord and the other marked for Azazel. And this is the very famous ritual, the Azazel ritual, where we have these 2 goats that one is selected for one thing and one is selected for the other. And this ritual we read about, again, we read this Torah portion at Yom Kippur, and it reminds us of how a specific instance of purification, expiation, forgiveness, which happened after Nadav and Avihu's death, is now applied to everyone every year. And you'll see why. We'll get to that. But so far, here's the ritual described. Aaron shall bring forward the goat designated by lot for the Lord, which he is to offer as a sin offering, while the goat designated by lot for Azazel shall be left standing alive before the Lord, to make expiation with it and to send it off to the wilderness for Azazel. Now, we always have to ask ourselves, now that we've heard Azazel be mentioned a bunch of times, where is Azazel? Now, again, the word Azazel definitely has kind of a sound to it, like, it sounds like an angel. It sounds like something that is connected somehow to God. Some people say that Azazel is a demon. Some say it's an angel, an angel of destruction. There are all different feelings about what Azazel is, or is Azazel a place? It's difficult to know for sure because we don't understand the original context for this. But this is where we get the word scapegoat. This is the Azazel goat, is a goat where the sins are put on the goat and then it's sent off. And it carries the sins with them, which again, there is a sin offering, a goat, which is offered to God as a normal sacrifice. But there is this weird other goat that is sent off into the wilderness. And it's definitely sent off into the wilderness. That's what the word Hamidbara means. And Azazel is there too, though, again. So it doesn't say exactly what's happening. We don't really know. People have kind of like speculated what's happening here in this scene. What's the reason for it? But what we do know is that this is one of the goats that actually makes expiation for the people.
And isn't that where the term scapegoat comes from?
That's where this is the first example. This is where the word comes from. It is a ritual that, again, we're not sure. We're not sure exactly what the context is for this, but we do know that other cultures had similar rituals where animals were designated to essentially carry the sins of the people. And again, there is already, we know, we see it, and we see it right now, that there's a sin offering that is a goat that is slaughtered, that's killed. This goat doesn't seem to be killed. Is it going to survive on its own in the desert? Probably not. But it's not slaughtered. It's not sacrificed. So it is definitely something different. It says, Aaron shall then offer his bull of sin offering to make expiation for himself and his household. He shall slaughter his bull of sin offering. And he shall take a pan full of glowing coals. And obviously the bull is much more expensive than the goat. He shall take a pan full of glowing coals, scoop from the altar before the Lord, and 2 handfuls of finely ground aromatic incense, and bring this behind the curtain. You shall put the incense on the fire before the Lord, so that the cloud from the incense screens the cover that is over the Ark of the Pact. So over the Ark of the Covenant, or Ark of the Ark, where the 10 Commandments are, he actually creates this smoke. And what happens is that smoke actually protects him. It says, lest he die. He shall take some of the blood of the bull and sprinkle with his finger over the cover of the east side, and in front of the cover he shall sprinkle some of the blood with his finger 7 times. He shall then slaughter the people's goat of sin offering. Bring its blood behind the curtain and do with its blood as he has done with the blood of the bull. You shall sprinkle it over the cover and in the front of the cover, over the cover and in front of the cover. This is the kaporet. This is the cover of the this is the cover that kind of is the inside separator, if you will, the kaporet. Look, again, we see blood being used as a cleansing device, that it actually it's not impure, the blood, it's actually creating purity. And so after he does his sacrifice for his family, for himself and his family, then he does the sacrifice of the goat for the people. Then he shall purge the shrine of the uncleanness and transgression of the Israelites, whatever their sins, and he shall do so for the tent of meeting, which abides with them in the midst of their uncleanness. When he goes to make expiation in the shrine, nobody else shall be in the tent of meeting until he comes out. When he has made expiation for himself and his household, for the whole congregation of Israel, he shall go to the altar that is before the Lord and purge it. He shall take some of the blood of the bull and of the goat and apply it to each of the horns of the altar. Again, very similar to what they did when they dedicated the altar in the first place. And the rest of the blood he shall sprinkle on it with his fingers 7 times. He shall cleanse it of its uncleanness of the Israelites and consecrate it. So they have a rededication of what they just did a week and a half ago, or not even a week and a half ago. They did the same thing before, and now they do it again. They have to clean it again. And you're already getting a sense here that this is not a one-time thing, that this is going to be done in the future. You already sense it by the language, because there doesn't seem to be, and this is what he does now. He shall go and do it and take some of the, and the way that the language that it's being used here seems to again indicate that this will be done. That this will be done in the future, and you'll see it. It will. When he finished purging the shrine, the tent of meeting, and the altar. So again, the shrine, the Holy of Holies, man, that he never goes into, except for that time. And even when he goes in there, he's got to fill it with smoke because he'll die. Tent of meeting, the altar, all those things, he's purged. He's clean. He's cleansed it. The other stuff,
Rabbi,
there's other people. Yeah.
when he goes in, maybe it's a midrash, but I heard the story that they would tie a string around his ankle.
Yep.
Okay.
So according to, it's not a midrash. According to, again, we'll get to it, but you'll see.
Oh, we will. Okay.
You'll see that this idea of a what's going to happen when he's in that space, it's dangerous, and he's still at risk every time or whenever he goes in there, and he only go. Well, we'll get to it. You'll see. When he finished purging the shrine, he shall then bring the live goat, that other Azazel goat, and here you see what he does. The samach Acharon et shtei yadav. He takes, Aaron lays both of his hands on the live goat and confess over it all the iniquities and transgression of the Israelites, whatever their sins, putting them on the head of the goat, and it shall be sent off to the wilderness through a designated man. And what's interesting about this is that it really does seem like, look, this is not a one-time thing, because, the Israelites, arguably, they do bad things every day, but it really needs to be cleansed for what Aaron's sons did, not for what the Israelites did. And so what you're seeing is, yeah, we're gonna put into our ritual a regular ritual, something that's going to cover us whenever we make a mistake. And so the Kohanim first have to ask for forgiveness for themselves, and then they can do it on behalf of everyone else, which of course reminds us that, again, the people who are the leaders need to make sure that they're in good shape before they can take care and lead and do their expiation on behalf of everybody else. They've got to cleanse themselves first. So Azazel. Thus the goat shall carry on it all the iniquities to an inaccessible region, and the goat shall be set free in the wilderness. Aaron shall go into the tent of meeting, take off the linen vestments that he put on when he entered the shrine, and leave them there. He shall bathe his body in water in the holy precinct and put on his vestments. He shall then come out and offer his burnt offering and the burnt offering of the people, making expiation for himself and the people and for the people. So here, when he puts on the vestments, now he's putting on all these clothes, all the big clothes, if you will. So after doing this ritual of purification, now he goes back essentially. Now he steps forward and makes these burnt offerings, these regular offerings, if you will, the ones that he does. The fat of the sin offering he shall turn. So burnt offering, the sin offering. He who set free the Azazel goat shall wash his clothes and bathe his body in water. After that, he may re-enter the camp. So he's got to cleanse himself. The bull of the sin offering and the goat of the sin offering, whose blood was brought in to purge the shrine, shall be taken outside the camp, and their hides and flesh and dung shall be consumed by fire. So those animals that were used in this purification, unlike the other offerings where you can use some of their stuff and eat their meat and use their stuff for different things, nope, not these animals. These animals that were used for the purification ritual are almost like taboo now. And he who burned them shall wash his clothes and bathe his body in water. After that, he may re-enter the camp. And now, lest there be any question, this shall be to you the law for all time, Chukad Olam, for all time. In the 7th month, on the 10th day of the month, you shall practice self-denial, and you shall do no manner of work, neither the citizen nor the alien who resides among you. For on this day of atonement shall be made for you. For on this day, atonement shall be made for you, to cleanse you of all your sins, and you shall be clean before the Lord. And that is the words, Ki vayom hazeh yichaper aleichem. And there's that word, kaper, kippur. This is the day of atonement. And it's now not a one-time deal. It's a law for all time. And it says, of course, the 7th month, because originally in the biblical period, as we said many times, Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah was not the beginning of the year. It was the middle of the year. These were the rituals. And it was only after the Babylonian experience that the Jews on the Egyptian calendar that began in the springtime at Passover, at now, time of now, this would be the new year. Instead, when they came under the Babylonian influence, they moved to a fall time. And here is the line again. It shall be Shabbat Shabbaton hi lachem v'initam et nashotechem chukad olam. It is a day of complete rest, a Shabbat Shabbaton. It's a Sabbath of Sabbaths. Yom Kippur, the 10th day, is a Sabbath of Sabbath. And it says you shall practice self-denial, which, of course, as we know, by the rabbinic period included eating, drinking, washing, anointing, having sex, and wearing leather shoes. Or again, shoes that were comfortable, too comfortable, if you will. Not really sure what the leather, I mean, there's differences of opinion on what really was going on with the leather, whether it's, not killing an animal, not wearing something that was too comfortable. But the tradition, again, still exists that people at Yom Kippur, as we do, we take this law very serious. Why? Because it's a chukat olam. It's a law for all time, forever and ever. And it's, again, one of the last rules that people will keep as Jews, even after they've given up much of Jewish practice. They retain this connection to not eating on Yom Kippur. Why? Originally, because it says it's the law for all time. But I think it's kind of retained for a lot of people, this kind of ultimate connection, if you will, to asking for forgiveness and to, again, I don't want to have to ask for forgiveness for the thing that I'm supposed to do to ask for forgiveness. The one thing I have to do to ask for forgiveness and to kind of get into that mode of being atoning is to do this, then I don't want to have to atone for that. So it's almost like atoning for the thing we're supposed to do for atoning. And it's really, again, it's for a lot of people. I remember reading years ago that Kirk Douglas, when he was he ended up becoming very close to tradition and ended up becoming a regular student of Torah and studied Torah regularly. But for a long time, when he was acting, he said he was kind of distant from tradition. But he said the one thing that he never did was eat on Yom Kippur, no matter what. He said he never gave that up.
And is this where the other religions got the process of confession and asking for forgiveness?
I think that it's definitely part of other traditions to some extent, because it was so important in Judaism that there was a personal act of confession. I think, I don't know if the confession ritual was, I'm not sure if there's really a good Jewish equivalent to that sacrament of confession, but the idea that there is a sacred rite of confession, this is one of the earliest we know of any culture for there to be an act of confession, and a ritual of confession for the individual, not just for the priest, but for an individual to do something like this. And again,
you can be clean of all your sins. Like if you ask Jesus for forgiveness before you die, you get clean of all your sins, supposedly.
Yeah, and what I think is interesting about this in Judaism is that that there was a ritual of sacrifice and purification, but as you can see, what it's really connected to was the priest being able to ask for forgiveness on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm. They
needed to make sure that they were ready. I mean, it really does emanate from the priests themselves, and essentially the people kind of behaving like the priests. I mean, this is in Leviticus, which is laws for the priest. Now, the law, it says right here, it's neither citizen nor the alien who resides among you. So it's not clearly just for the priests to do this atonement, but this idea that people have a chance to be clean, and the idea that if you think about it, what starts as a ritual for priests becomes the ritual for everybody. Now, I will say this: we actually read a midrash yesterday, even on Tuesday's class, where we read a midrash that it says when God is about to give the 10 commandments to the people in Exodus chapter 19, it says, God says, you're a nation, mamlechet kohanim, goy kadosh, you're a holy nation, and you're a nation of priests. You're a people who are holy and a nation of priests. And so the rabbis took this literally. They said, up until the moment that the people sinned with a golden calf and only the Levites held true to God, the Midrash states that up until that time, there wasn't going to be priests, which is a weird idea that God literally said, now just the Levites will be priests because the people can't do it. But there is this sense at Yom Kippur that the people, like the priests, are going to cleanse themselves and have a chance to start over. So getting back to your initial point, Joyce, I think is an interesting one, is that rather than having a priest that we need to go to for confession, the reality is that essentially, yes, the Kohen Gadol did these rituals, but the reality is that the people need to be cleansed much as the priests are being cleansed. And it kind of really does harken back to, this is a very priestly ritual. This is not like for normal people, if you will. But Israel is treated like a nation of priests. And even though, again, there are priests now, designated priests, it really does seem like it's the people that are to some extent priests. Like if you didn't have this little law here, which is this is for everybody, neither the citizen nor the alien who resides among you, you'd almost think this sounds like it's just for the priests. But it's why it's, you can make the argument that's why it tells us that. Yeah, it's very much like you're part of this. You're part of this. It says the priest who has been anointed and ordained to serve as priest in the place of his father shall make expiation. He shall put on linen vestments and the sacral vestments. He shall purge the innermost shrine, shall purge the tent of meeting and the altar, and he shall make expiation for the priests and for the people of the congregation. This shall be a law for you for all time, to make atonement for the Israelites for all their sins once a year. And Moses did as the Lord commanded him, which means that he then went, because again, he's supposed to tell Aaron all this. He delivers the message to Aaron that this is what you're going to do. This is what you're going to do to make expiation. But again, it very much seems like the people are part of this process, that they're very, very important. They're very necessary for this ritual to be done. So as much as there's bulls and goats and Azazel and blood and everything else, the people fasting along with them is really an act of, necessary act for atonement. And again, that's the word, hukarolam lechaper. Again, the word kaper for atonement, to cleanse and to be clean and be able to go in. Now, chapter 17 continues with these laws of the priest. And I want to say that because I kind of want to make it clear to you that we're after this, we're going to change direction into chapter 18. And that's where, again, the holiness code, if you will, starts. So 16 and 17 are about this ritual of kaper, of atonement, of cleansing, and then it's going to change. So this is very similar theme. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to Aaron and his sons and to all the Israelite people and say to them, this is what the Lord has commanded. If anyone of the house of Israel slaughters an ox or sheep or goat in the camp, or does so outside the camp, and does not bring it to the entrance of the tent of meeting to present it as an offering to the Lord before the Lord's tabernacle, blood guilt shall be imputed to that man. He has shed blood, that man shall be cut off from among his people. Now, what are they talking about here, right? He's slaughtering an ox or goat or sheep. I mean, it doesn't seem like he's doing anything wrong. Here's the issue, and you can understand why the priests are concerned about this. This is in order that the Israelites may bring their sacrifices, which they've been making in the open, that they may bring them before the Lord to the priest at the entrance of the tent of meeting and offer them as sacrifices of well-being to the Lord, that the priest may dash the blood against the altar of the Lord, the entrance of the tent of meeting, and turn the fat into smoke as a pleasing odor to the Lord. And that they may offer their sacrifices no more to goat demons after whom they stray. This shall be the law for all time throughout the ages. Now, we just got a little clue as to what's going on here, which is that the priests are telling the people, don't offer up sacrifices anywhere unless the priests are doing it.
Mm-hmm.
You can't let people do it. And why? Because if they offer up their sacrifices, they're going to offer them up to goat demons, and they're going to offer them up to false gods. And so don't ever let the people do this. Not now, not ever. They cannot be on their own to make sacrifices. And what it says is that, originally it says that they may not make their offerings in the open, all panei hasadeh, out in the fields, out in the open, whatever translation you want. The fact is that it's telling us that people did it. And the priests are saying they're not supposed to do it because they're offering them up to goat demons and to gods that are not God. It can also be argued that they don't want anybody doing it besides them. That if anybody else is offering up sacrifices, even if it's to God, it's encroaching on their job. They don't want people to do it. They don't say that they may be offering up sacrifices to God. They say, look, when they do it, they're going to do it to those other things too. So because we can't, here's their argument. Because we can't be sure if some of your friends, sure, you won't do it, but some of your friends are going to offer up goat demon sacrifices. And because of that, none of you can do it. And so we're the only people who are going to do it because we're going to do it to God, and everyone's going to know it's to God. And we're going to say the right words. We're going to invoke God's name. We're going to do it just as God said, offering it up to God. And that way, no one will offer up sacrifices to the wrong thing. And so that's their argument. Their argument is everyone's going to do it the way we're telling them to do it. Now, of course, it also means that they get all the food, they get all the cows, and they get all the money for themselves. But there's a problem. There were people that were offering up sacrifices to other gods. So they're not wrong. Just a question. We don't know what percentage of the sacrifices were being done improperly. But we do know, if anyone, say to them further, if anyone of the house of Israel or of the strangers who reside among them offers a burnt offering or a sacrifice and does not bring it to the entrance of the tent of meeting to offer it to the Lord, that person will be cut off from his people, which is the word Achrei, which again is excommunication. It's being kicked out, being segregated. Doesn't say killed, but it does say they're cut off, not allowed to have anything to do with them anymore. Further says, and if anyone of the house of Israel or the strangers who reside among them partakes of any blood, I will set my face against that person who partakes of that blood, and I will cut him off from amongst his kin. Same thing. Don't have the blood. Now, you could say, well, we just read about sacrifices. Well, maybe this isn't a sacrifice. What we seem to be reading about are people who would maybe take the blood of the food that they're eating and uses it for some kind of ritual. Not the meat, just the blood. Or drinks the blood and says, this is my ritual. Those are all things that they're not going to allow. The priests are going to say all those kinds of rituals, especially these rituals that involve blood sacrifices or blood where they're not in charge of it and where it's not going the way they say they're going. That's a pagan ritual. That's something we're not going to allow. And no.
If this is so strict, Rabbi, why are the Jews accused of drinking blood and using blood in matzah and taking blood from others? Why are those accusations throughout history?
Well, it's very
It
interesting.
seems crazy because there's such a rule against it.
Because people did read it. They knew that the Torah, I wouldn't say it's not obsessed with it, but it's definitely there. And they knew that it was there. And so there's a couple of things here. The first is that, oh, well, if it says you're not supposed to do it, then people may have been doing it. Okay, you can accept that. But it's also very possible that their own Christian rituals, because they were invoking blood, like the blood of Christ in the Eucharist, and the flesh of God in the wafer of the Eucharist, that this might have confused people and enhanced their belief that Judaism also had rituals like that, and that again, the connection and the weird connections that people made with it were there. And what's interesting is we know that in other traditions, blood wasn't forbidden, or blood being used in recipes or in food wasn't forbidden. And so people
accuse the Jews of doing it.
Yeah, and they, again, they just kind of conflated things, or again, were told these things, or found it weird that Jews didn't have blood. So they must be getting blood from somewhere else. So if they're not supposed to have animal blood, maybe they're drinking human blood. I mean, like the ways that the places that people's minds go with these kinds of things they're unending. They're the different ways that people would have interpreted. But yeah, people knew. I mean, there were priests who read the Bible, Christian priests who read the Bible. They knew what was in the Christian. They knew what was in the Hebrew Bible. I was talking with a Christian yesterday. Remember, we've talked about this before. 3/4, I mean, actually 79% of the Christian Bible is the Hebrew Bible. I looked it up. There's in the King James, there's 780,000 words. There are 622,000 words in the Old Testament, which means there's only less than 160,000 words in the New Testament, in the Christian Bible. So 720 versus.
I didn't know that.
I mean, I looked at the math. It's 79%. It's almost 80%. So it's almost 4/5, 80% of the Christian Bible is the Hebrew Bible. So they knew it. They just either interpreted it the way they wanted to, or and purposely fed their congregants weird ideas, or again, just projected their own kinds of fantasies over. If Jews don't have blood in their food, then maybe they have it somewhere else. So we know, and again, there's these lines which tell us that the blood has power. It says, "For the life of flesh is in the blood, and I have assigned it to you for making expiation for your lives upon the altar." It is the blood, it is life that affects expiation. So the blood of these animals is sacred, and it is kind of recognized as having power. And so you don't abuse that. You use it for this holy ritual, but generally speaking, I mean, number one, you don't eat it. Number two, you don't really use it other than where the priests are being told where to use it. And it says right here, "Therefore I say to the Israelite people, no person among you shall partake of blood, nor this," and again, not just the Jews, but anybody who lives among the Jews, "nor shall the stranger who resides among you partake of blood. And if any Israelite or stranger who resides among them hunts down an animal or bird that may be eaten, he shall pour out its blood and cover it with the earth." So again, there's this understanding that even hunting an animal and if it bleeds, that this is a problem, that this blood is sacred. All the life of all flesh, kol basar damo, it is the blood, it's life, it's life. "Therefore I say to the Israelite people, you shall not partake of the blood of any flesh, for the life of all flesh is its blood. Anyone who partakes of it shall be cut off." So it's pretty strict rule.
Clear.
"Any person, whether citizen or stranger, who eats what has died or has been torn by beasts, shall wash his clothes, bathe in water, and remain unclean until evening. Then he shall be clean." So again, if person who eats something that's died, or treif, again, something that we say is treifa, something that's been torn. Look, he may have eaten and he may have had to eat it. He may have not known that it was torn, and he finds out afterwards. So he goes through a cleansing ritual. There's a way for him to be clean. And after he waits until night, he can come back into the community. But if he does not wash his clothes and bathe his body, he shall bear his guilt. So those are other rituals attached to sacrifices. Maybe not exactly Yom Kippur rituals, but kind of remind us of them, and they're very similar in theme to chapter 16. So there's blood. It's important. We used it in chapter 16 and 17. We made sure we didn't eat it or use it improperly. Again, making sure that even like if an animal was dying or dead, we would cover up the blood. We understand that blood represents life and has power. And by the way, also, as we know, is a wonderful way to spread sickness. And so this would also keep people a little bit healthier if they didn't have the blood. And
Plus the cleanliness kept people healthier.
And washing.
They washing the clothes, washing their bodies.
Washing if they come into contact with this stuff.
Mhm.
Now we get into chapter 18, which definitely carries over into the next few chapters. It's the last part of Achrei Mot when this is read separately. It's not this year. It's read as a dual portion. Next year, this is the last part of it. So there's a break. Tonight there's not. And so tonight you're actually going to see the flow of what happens here. So it has a different effect when we read it in the years that this is the end of it. And the way we read it at Yom Kippur, traditionally, if we read the whole portion, we don't. We read chapter 16 at Yom Kippur. Excuse me, some synagogues read 16, 17, and 18 at Yom Kippur. But this is interesting because the rabbis actually say that chapter 18, this first part of these kind of holiness code, is actually why we read it at Yom Kippur, or why it's read as part of Yom Kippur. It was not just to remind us of what we do to purify ourselves, which seems an obvious one, but also this chapter, which is to help us live a better life, especially when it comes to our sexual behavior, because that's what chapter 18 is primarily about. So it says, the Lord spoke to Moses saying, speak to the Israelite people and say to them, I, the Lord, am your God. You shall not copy the practices of the land of Egypt where you dwelt, or of the land of Canaan to which I'm taking you, nor shall you follow their laws. Don't follow the laws of Egypt and don't follow the laws of Canaan. So both, you're surrounded by this. You're surrounded by it. There's nowhere you can go where you're going to get away from this. My rules alone shall you observe and faithfully follow my laws. I, the Lord, am your God. Ani Adonai Elohechem, which you'll see several times. I, the Lord, am your God. You shall keep my laws and my rules, by the pursuit of which man shall live. Live by these laws. I am the Lord. Again, Ani Adonai. This is maybe one of the most powerful lines in the whole Torah. Keep my laws, because the way that you keep them, the way that you live by them, is that you will live. You'll, the word chai bachem, you will live, chai bachem, you will live because of them. You will live in them. You will live by them, not just by the fact that you will live by them, but you'll actually live because of them.
Mm.
And this principle, by the way, is one of the reasons why we say that all of Jewish law must conform. When we talk about where we read a few weeks ago about not using parts of an unclean animal, if the only way for you to live is by using that pig valve, then of course you must do it, because chai bachem, you live by them. You will live because of them. You won't die, because if by following a law you're going to die, you don't follow it.
Mhm.
If you're in a place where you have no more food and the only food you can eat is non-kosher food, it's a no-brainer. You don't have to wait and ask a rabbi what to do. You're supposed to live. And because you're supposed to live, you must follow this law, this principle, all the laws. Because it doesn't say this law, the law that you're about to read. It says my laws. It doesn't say one law. All the laws are laws that you're supposed to be able to live because of them and not harm yourself and not harm, again, your ability to live. Chai bachem, you must live by them. And so it's not that it cannot be really read any other way by the fact that if you follow these laws, you will live. And the converse isn't that you'll die if you don't follow the rules, but if you, by following the rule, you'll die, you don't follow that rule.
Right.
It says, my rules My laws, live by them. And again, man will live. It doesn't actually say Jews will live. It says Adam, people will live. So here we get to them. And so it starts off, the first thing it starts with, the holiness code, is these laws of, we would call family law, or laws of, these are the laws of maintaining the dignity of the community. And if I just studied these laws with the kids earlier today. And so how do you even study this? Well, listen, it's a kid's bar mitzvah portion. So what do you do? It was Mike Schwartz's bar mitzvah portion. What do you do? So you can't say, well, I'm going to ignore this. You're going to say to the kids, look, the Egyptians, and they knew this. I asked them, they knew it. So the Egyptians had a really interesting law when it came to who the pharaohs married. Who did they marry? Who did the pharaohs marry? They knew. They're sisters. I just said you don't follow the laws of the Egyptians. This is because the Egyptians did these kind of things. None of you shall come near anyone of his own flesh to uncover nakedness. I am the Lord. Your father's nakedness, that is the nakedness of your mother, you shall not uncover. She is your mother. You shall not uncover her nakedness. Do not uncover the nakedness of your father's wife. It is the nakedness of your father. So lest you think it's just about your mother, no, it's also your stepmother. The nakedness of your sister, your father's daughter or your mother's, even if they're half sisters, whether born into the household or outside, do not uncover their nakedness. So even if this is somebody who doesn't live in your house, that your father had another relationship in another city, whatever, no, not okay. And again, it wasn't only okay, the leaders of Egypt, the pharaohs, did this regularly. They married their own sisters. Can't do it. And if you looked at where you came from, that was done. The nakedness of your son's daughter or your daughter's daughter, do not uncover their nakedness, for their nakedness is yours. The nakedness of your father's wife's daughter, or who was born into your father's household, she's your sister. Do not uncover her nakedness. Do not uncover the nakedness of your father's sister. She is your father's flesh. Do not uncover the nakedness of your mother's sister, for she is your mother's flesh. Do not uncover the nakedness of your father's brother. Do not approach his wife. She is your aunt. Do not uncover the nakedness of your daughter-in-law. She is your son's wife. You shall not uncover her nakedness. Do not uncover the nakedness of your brother's wife. It is the nakedness of your brother. And of course, there is an exception, which is if your brother never had a child, you're supposed to have sex with his wife in order for her to have a child. But it's a one-time thing, and it's not your child. It's his child. So there is an exception to that. But again, in normal situations, unless, again, your brother died without having a child. Remember, if you had a child, there isn't anything like that. But if you hadn't have a child, if she never had a child, you're supposed to at least give her a chance to have a child, which again is not here in the Bible mentioned, but it is mentioned later on. Do not, and by the way, later on, it's not really followed in Judaism, the law of Levirate marriage. It's not followed. We kind of follow this principle, which is, you're exposing, and again, that phrase over and over again, you're uncovering the nakedness of your brother, which means, again, you're invading the personal and private space that was his space. And I don't mean like, literally like you're not, the intimacy that you're creating is literally going to create a problem because of the relationship that your family member already had, whether it was your father's wife or your brother's wife. That this is to preserve that person's dignity. Do not uncover the nakedness of a woman and her daughter, nor shall you marry her son's daughter or her daughter's daughter, and uncover her nakedness. They are kindred. It is depravity or depravity. Depravity. Do not marry a rival woman as a rival to her sister and uncover her nakedness in the other's lifetime. So that's an interesting point because it actually says during her lifetime. So can you marry a sister after her sister died, your first wife? Yes, technically. But you're not supposed to marry them at the same time. Now, of course, we know that Jacob did exactly that, but he was not supposed to, and it was not a good situation because of that rivalry between the two sisters. Again, these laws are to try to preserve the dignity of the family and
And the peacefulness.
And that one is actually said specifically because of the situation of creating a rivalry between these relationships. And it happens. It's not uncommon for in relationships for people, to have these types of relationships. And they're generally, there are exceptions, and I know everyone's going to say there's exceptions, but generally speaking, they're not healthy relationships. They're relationships that actually are oftentimes problematic and are, if not dysfunctional, that probably at their root something that is not a healthy expression of to put it mildly, of intimacy and of probably sublimating. And again, I'm not a professional, but probably not the right way of grieving and caring for somebody. But it happens. I mean, look, I'm not going to give away any secrets. It happened in the Biden family, right? After Bo died, Hunter Biden had an affair with his sister-in-law, his widowed sister-in-law, and it created a lot of problems within the family. And the relationship ended up, becoming not a good one between the two. But they admitted that it came about from their common grief, but it was not a good situation. It was not a good situation for the kids. It was not a good situation for the family. And it's a high profile example, but it happens, and it's the Bible recognizes that it's maybe a natural inclination that people have, but they shouldn't mix their grief and their relationships and their intimacy with sex.
Mm-hmm.
This is to preserve, as Joyce, just said, it's to preserve peace and harmony within families, which again, if we can't keep families together, then it's going to be really hard to keep a community together.
Yes.
Do not marry a woman as a rival. That's right, as a sister. That's what it says, as a rival. It added that word. Do not come near a woman during her period of uncleanness to uncover her nakedness. So there's the law of nidah. It says ve'elisha benidat, the time of her menstruation. So again, as we mentioned, this is connected to the previous portion where it talked about women who are menstruating or men who have a discharge, to understand that there's, possible uncleanness, and also not just spiritually, but physically, and perhaps even, again, a higher probability for the transmission of sexually transmitted diseases, illnesses. All of those types of things are all possibilities for why. Other people speculate that the reason for this law is to enhance the time that people can actually, most likely, be having sex during times of ovulation, so that what would happen here is, by preventing people from having sex for a week, and after literally a week from the time of her menstruation, that would actually encourage people to have sex during the 2 weeks when she was most likely to be ovulating. So that's the theory about why a full week of after her menstruation stops. Do not have carnal relations with your neighbor's wife and defile yourself with her, which definitely seems to be connected to this idea of keeping peace.
Mhm.
And now we get into this very interesting law. Do not allow any of your offspring to be offered up to Molech, and do not profane the name of your God. I am the Lord, Ani Adonai, again. So this ritual of child sacrifice is, I guess, fairly obvious for us today, but not in the ancient world, because the Canaanites all engaged, from we know, in child sacrifice. It was a common ritual. And Judaism said, no, you don't do it. And it actually took courage in those days not to do it, to actually say, we're not doing what these people do. Now we take it for granted because our society follows Judeo-Christian law when it comes to these things. But what would the world be like if these kinds of things were not part of our ingrained on our consciousness and part of our society? Would people offer up their children? And it's very interesting that even during the time of Maimonides, 1,000 years ago, they understood that people didn't offer up their children because they wanted to kill their children. They offered up their children because they literally felt that if they offered up their firstborn child, for example, that all the other children would be protected. And when you're running 40, 50, 60% infant mortality rates, you'll do anything you can to try to protect your children. And because they didn't know about RH factors and they didn't know about things that we take for granted today, where you literally give a woman a shot or a baby a shot in the first, first couple hours, and the child will live. Otherwise, they die. And it didn't matter how many times the mother had a child. Every time she was having an RH positive or negative baby, and she was the opposite, the baby was dying. And it happened over and over and over again. And people didn't understand it. They didn't know why. And so they offered up a child and said, please, gods, help my child, the rest of my children, not die. Judaism deferred and no, you know what? That's not how it's happening. But it took a lot of courage to say, nope, this isn't the way we do it. Now we get to verse 22. Now we get to the law. And we're going to see it two times in, we're going to get to chapter 20. So chapter 18 has in verse 22 this law: do not lie with a male as one lies with a woman. It is an abhorrence. And we've talked about this in previous years. We've talked about it out of context. This is the law that people say, well, and again, in chapter 20, when it's reiterated, this is the law that, again, people will use to say Judaism, the Torah, is against homosexuality. And as we've mentioned before and is offered before, and you can see the context of it here, it's definitely in the context of prohibited relationships. And it comes after the laws of the people you're allowed to have connections to, intimate connections to. But then it gets into idolatry. And it goes into this, which some people say it's because this law and the law right below it, do not have carnal relations with any beast and defile yourself thereby, and let no woman lend herself to a beast to mate with it. It is a perversion. Sounds a lot like what the Canaanites did. And if you don't think that context of those few lines are part of it, let's read the next line. Do not defile yourselves in any of those ways, for such is what the nations that I'm casting out before you defiled themselves. Thus the land became defiled, and I called it to account for its iniquity, and the land spewed out its inhabitants. But you must keep my laws and my rules, that you must not do any of those abhorrent things, neither the citizen nor the stranger who resides amongst you. For all those abhorrent things were done by the people who were in the land before you, and the land become defiled, so that not the land spew you out for defiling it as it spewed out the nation that came before you. Last line, last two lines, sorry. All who do these abhorrent things, such persons shall be cut off from their people. You shall keep my charge not to engage in any of the abhorrent practices that were carried on before you. You shall not defile yourselves through them. I am the Lord, your God. Ani Adonai Elohechem. Again, So when you look at where, and again, that's the end of the portion. Okay. I'm not telling you that's the way the portion ends. So when we look at the context of where this falls, it's clear, I believe, and again, this is not my belief. I'm not saying that I'm believing this by myself. I'm telling you that there is no question in the context of where this is given that this practice is a problem because it's lumped in with these other rituals or practices of the Canaanites. And these types of practices were done by the Canaanites. We know that. These three things in particular, offering up children, lying with a man as one lies with a woman, and having carnal relations with beasts. Those three things in particular were done by them. And the Bible says specifically, if you do them, you're going to be punished just like the Canaanites were. They did those things. You don't do them because the land will kick you out if you do them. Now, the problem, of course, is, are we making, by saying that Judaism is to some extent accepting or tolerating homosexuality, are we making a rationalization by not saying that the Torah speaks out firmly against homosexuality? Because here's the argument. The argument is that if we say that homosexuality is a practice, it comes down to this. Are we making this decision based on the fact that our culture allows for homosexuality to be accepted, and therefore the argument would be that we're still making an exception for it because our prevailing societal norms will allow for it to happen? So the problem is that if we take it out of context and say, because, or no, if we don't take it out of context, if we look at the context, you can make the argument that it's because you don't behave like the nations around you, and you'll be punished like the nations around you. So if your decision for accepting it is because you're tolerating what other people are doing, the Torah is pretty clear that that's not a justification for it. Because if it is a perversion, if it is wrong, then that's why these people are getting thrown out. The Canaanites are being thrown out because they were engaging in these practices. So got to be a little careful about that. And we have to be honest about that. We have to be fully honest about it. Now, I will say that in this context, when it says this is a toeva, so when it says that if you one lies with a man like a woman, it is a toeva. It is an abhorrence. It is a toeva. However you want to translate the word toeva. When toeva is used, as people have pointed out, it is the same word toeva is used in other places for other practices that you're not supposed to do, including in Deuteronomy. It says if anyone eats food from an animal that they're not supposed to, it is also a toeva. So some people have pointed out that if we're going to use the same word, use the same meaning, then we have to include all the other things that are also an abomination. So if people are very upset with the relations that a man has with another man, and it's called a toeva, then you also should likewise be upset with the fact that non-kosher meat is also a toeva. And you don't seem to care about that because you're eating your pork sandwich and your shrimp cocktail. So you shouldn't be so worried about abhorrences if you're not upset with that abhorrence. So that's another argument that's being made, that it's inconsistent to not worry about every time the word abhorrence, toeva, is mentioned. And it's used quite a few times, a dozen or so times in the Bible, we come across the word toeva. So that's a legitimate out of context argument about what's going on here. We will understand, and again, I'm telling you this from colleagues of mine who are gay, will tell you there is a practical fact that we cannot ignore, which is that for our ancestors 2,000 years ago, lying with a man or engaging in any type of sexual activity that would not allow for procreation, even allow for procreation, was a problem, because it made sure that, again, if people followed this law and remember, keep this in mind, because I'm not saying this out of context. I'm saying it in the context of this law and the laws that we're about to read, that if you follow this law, remember, you're protecting society from essentially zero population.
Right.
If people do engage in homosexual practice from the standpoint of how their sexual relationships are defined, then they are not allowing themselves to procreate. And that's a problem. And all of these three laws, if you look at them in context, not out of context, very much in context, offering your children to Molech, having sex with a man, and having sex with a animal, all three of them do the same thing. You don't have kids.
You're limiting the population.
Yep.
You're limiting the growth of the population.
Now, the counter argument would be, well, if a few people do it, what's the problem? Well, obviously, we don't want anybody to offer their kids to Molech. You'd say, well, do we want to offer anybody the opportunity to have a homosexual relationship? I don't know. Carnal relationships with a beast. Look, that's where people get all upset when they make an argument that homosexuality and bestiality are linked in the Bible. Yeah, but it's also linked to offering up your children to foreign gods, and it is also included in a whole chapter. Again, I'm telling you this so you can be educated in this, that it's in a whole chapter that has to do with prohibited marital relations or prohibited sexual relations. We actually say marital relations, but it's actually for sexual relations. That this is, again, the whole text that we have in front of us, and you'll see what happens afterwards. Again, you could say, but it's happening once. It's happening to this family. If one person decides to engage in a homosexual behavior, it's not going to destroy the whole country. Look, those are all arguments that people make today. But I will tell you, I've had this discussion with gay rabbinic colleagues who will tell you, yeah, I understand why the Bible says it, because the Bible is trying to protect people from disappearing.
Right.
Because there's no people if people do engage in this. Now, again, do we live in a different society today? One can make the argument, yes. And one of the things that people will say is that what this is specifically talking about is a ritual or a practice of the Canaanites where men were essentially taken in a sexual way where they, and again, people are going to say, well, how's this different from relationships where people would have today that were a transsexual relationship? The reality is that the Bible definitely is warning people against situations where, for better or worse, the natural order is being not followed.
Mm-hmm.
And that is probably, again, one of the real issues that they have here too, which is that people who are creating situations where the net results or the eventual result could be a degradation of society, that's where they have an issue with it. Now, the counter argument that people would offer today is that people can have a consensual homosexual relationship that's not a degradation. It could be very well, though, that in the biblical period, those type of relationships were only seen as degrading and either ritualistic, in the sense that the person was literally taken in a pagan ritual, which essentially would be a fertility ritual, but almost a perversion of the fertility ritual. Keep that in mind, because that does seem to be what's at play here as well. You'll see it in the next chapter. So I want you to see the full context of it, and I want you to understand what is really going on here in the full breadth of it. And again, I encourage people to, depending on how much time we have when we finish, we'll revisit this issue, because I don't want to avoid this. I'm not avoiding it. I've discussed it for a few minutes now, but I want people to know that I'm not making excuses, and I don't want people to say, oh, well, he's whitewashing what the Torah says. I'm not. I'm telling you exactly what the Torah says, and offering you some context for it, and the real context, which is not stuff I'm making up. It's the stuff that you can read right here. So let's look at chapter 19, which is the beginning sometimes of a new portion, but very much consistent with the previous portion, which is why this year it's a doubled up portion. So we'll reach Kedoshim. And this is really important. And again, probably a little bit later than I wanted to get to this chapter, because this has got some amazing stuff in it. And it is going to come back in chapter 20 to the sexual things to close down. And we'll get to that. But chapter 19, some of the most famous parts of the whole Torah. So let's get into it. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the whole community of Israel and say to them, you shall be holy, for I, the Lord, your God, am holy. I'm holy. You're holy too. And that's the famous line, Kedoshim tihiyu ki kadosh ani. I am holy, you'll be holy too. Right? And then we get into a miniature version of the 10 Commandments. Slightly different order, but you'll see most of the principles are here. You shall each revere his mother and his father. Here it's reversed. And keep my Shabbat. I'm the Lord your God. So that's very much like the 10 Commandments. That's Commandment 5, and then Commandment 4. Shabbat and they come in different order in the Exodus, and in the other order as well. In Exodus, it's the father before the mother, but it's also a different word. It is the word yirah, tira'u. You shall revere or fear. And the rabbis postulate that the reason why it's reversed here is where it says before, kabed et avicha ve'imecha, honor your father and your mother. It's to compensate for the fact that we oftentimes honor our mothers more than our fathers. And so the Torah tells us to honor our father too. And it says it right at the beginning. Here, where we maybe would be more likely to fear our father than our mother, it actually says to revere your mother and your father. It's a possibility. It's one of the traditional explanations for why it's reversed in Exodus, from Exodus to Leviticus. So slightly different wording, but the message is the same, which is, again, honoring your parents. And actually, you're going to see a specific corollary to that too in this week's portion. Do not turn to idols or make molten gods for yourselves. I, the Lord, am your God, which is the second commandment. Not only not to have any gods before you, but not to make them, which is the next part of it. When you sacrifice an offering of well-being to the Lord, sacrifice it so that it may be accepted on your behalf. It shall be eaten on the day you sacrifice it or on the day following, but what is left by the third day must be consumed by fire. If it should be eaten on the third day, it's an offensive thing. It's a pigul. It's a little different word than the toeva. It will not be acceptable. And he who eats it shall bear his guilt, for he has profaned what is sacred to the Lord, and that person shall be cut off from his kin. So this law, which is about sacrifice, these 4 verses, it kind of makes sense. It's in Leviticus. We've read about essentially this already. We already read this law back at the beginning of Achrei. We read in Leviticus that you're not supposed to let the sacrifice hang over. But again, it's a little sacrificial law that's added into this. We don't have any sacrificial laws in the 10 Commandments, but we do here in the Holiness Code. And it's quite a long actual law. If you look at it, it's 4 verses. So it's a little bit longer than the previous laws, which again makes sense. It's Leviticus. Now, this next law is one that you have heard, and it's actually a fairly long law as well. When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap all the way to the edges of your field or gather the gleans of your harvest. You shall not pick your vineyard bare or gather the fallen fruit of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and the stranger. I, the Lord, am your God. And there we have the phrase again, Ani Adonai Elohechem. And almost every time that's punctuated, it's really a really powerful kind of, refrain, which is, I, the Lord, am your God. And here we have the law of leaving what we call the payah. Word payot, like the corners of our hair. The payat sadecha, the corners of the fields. And some people say that the reason why people don't shave the corners of their hair and leave the payot is to remind ourselves of the payot sadecha, the corners of the fields, which we keep for the poor. It's our way of making sure that the poor are provided for, by making sure that we just don't clean up everything and we don't pick up the gleanings, the leket, the gleanings, the things that are left behind. We let the poor come in after we're done to clean that up and to be able to have a little something for themselves. The Torah doesn't say how much to leave. And again, later on in the rabbinic commentaries, how you leave your corners is specified, so that again, you wind up leaving a tithe. You end up leaving 10% of your stuff for the poor, between the leket, the gleanings, and the payoff. So those are two things: corners and gleanings. You can see a couple lines there. Right? Now, get into some other laws. You shall not steal, one of the 10 commandments. You shall not deal deceitfully or falsely with one another. That's a little different. Pretty serious thing. As one of the kids who was reading this with me today said, people do this all the time. These are people, it's pretty hard not to do any of these things. I said, well, it's definitely hard to do, but you can see the Torah does not want us to do these things. You shall not swear falsely by my name. It's the third commandment, profaning the name of your God. I am the Lord. You shall not defraud your fellow. You shall not commit robbery. And here's the famous law: the wages of a laborer shall not remain with you until morning. So you're not allowed to hold on to people's salaries. If you owe them money, you must pay them, unless you agree to say, I'm going to pay you every other week. That's okay. But otherwise, you have to pay when you promise somebody. Can't let them wait. You shall not insult the deaf or place a stumbling block before the blind. You shall fear your God. I'm the Lord. And a lot of people say, look at that law and the fact that it finishes with this word, you shall fear the Lord, which is, again, the way we treat those who are dealing with any kind of physical challenge. Don't think that there's not going to be an accounting for you if you take advantage of those people. God's going to fix it. It says right there, fear your God. So if you don't think about it, if you don't think about these people or think you can get away with taking advantage of them, God will essentially, again, by saying you shall fear God right there, there's that sense of, God's going to make up for it. Here's the very famous line we have too: you shall not render an unfair decision. Do not show favor to the poor or show deference to the rich. Judge your kinsmen fairly. And people always love commenting on the brilliance of that line, which is that we do not favor the poor. Now, everybody says, oh, showing deference to the rich, that's obvious, right? We don't want to make sure that someone can buy their way into freedom, right? Not get away without having justice. But it also says that we're not allowed to compensate and go overboard in the way that we treat the people who are poor. That, by the way, is a bigger challenge for us today than maybe anything else when it comes to rendering fair decisions, is that we cannot take into consideration the fact that just because someone's poor doesn't necessarily mean, even if we're feeling sorry for them, that we don't abrogate the law and overcompensate by making sure that they get away with things that are unjust. And boy, do we seem perilously close to going overboard on that regularly. So this is a big issue. And now we get into some very famous laws. Do not deal basely with your countrymen. Do not profit by the blood of your fellow. I am the Lord. And again, this is the people that you live with, the people that are part of your community. And here we go. You shall not hate your kinsfolk, your brother, in your heart. Reprove your kinsmen, but incur no guilt because of them. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against your countrymen. Love your fellow as yourself. Ve'ahavta l'recha kamocha. Love your neighbor like yourself. And that is, of course, one of the most famous lines, chapter 19, verse 18.
Mhm.
Love your neighbor as yourself. And how that line changed the world and gave people this understanding that they are responsible for their fellow, which again, translation that they use here, fellow. But again, this is your neighbor, your colleague, your people in your community. That at the basis for it is this idea of loving other people. And again, people who are able to take that to heart, oftentimes, again, kind of take the other part to heart too, which we sometimes forget, is not to take vengeance or bear a grudge against your countrymen. So this is about, again, forgiving, being able to respect other people, and being able to, at the end of the day, open our hearts to other people. It doesn't mean that we allow them to do bad things. The previous line says, quite frankly, the exact opposite of just let people do whatever they want. It says, reprove your kinsmen, but incur no guilt because of them, right? So if someone's making a mistake, you got to take them, you got to hold them accountable, and you got to tell them. And this is this famous phrase, hocheach tochiach, that you have to reprove them. You have to stop them from making a mistake. We're obligated to do that. And you can't just do this part and not do that part.
Mhm.
You can't just do this part and not do this part. They're both there. They're both in the same chapter. They're both one verse apart. They're not. They're literally the same kind of idea. If you want to look at the previous one says Ani Adonai, if you want to look at this as a refrain, as a kind of a period, if an exclamation point, the phrase then, these two lines go together. You shall not hate your kinsfolk in your heart, reprove your kinsmen, but incur no guilt of them. Do not take vengeance or bear grudge against your kinsmen. Love your fellow as yourself. That's those two lines to some extent go together, which is we're responsible for each other. We love each other, but we also, again, let people know when they've made a mistake, because essentially, again, otherwise you're guilty of it.
Mhm.
And so we take it seriously. Communal responsibility is so important in Judaism. And now we're going to get to the part that I think begins to open up the previous chapter, chapter 18, when it gets to what the Torah has really to say about sexual relationships, especially ones that are not necessarily prohibited just from the standpoint of prohibited relationships. And again, what's interesting is that nobody comments on the majority of the chapter, because the majority of the chapter basically prohibits incest, which is against the law in this country. It's not against the law in every country. It's against the law in this country. It's against the law in not most of, but all of Western society, as I know of, that those are all prohibited relationships. They're prohibited. They're against the law. Not against the law everywhere. And it wasn't against the law in the ancient world. And most people say, well, there's this law against homosexuality. Well, what about the laws against incest, which are 20 lines about prohibited relationships, and pretty specific when it comes to, again, making sure that no one will have any question about it. It's going to be in the next part of this last part of the chapter, which thankfully we did get to in time. So, you shall observe my laws. You shall not let your cattle mate with different kind. You shall not sow your field with two kinds of seed, and you shall not put on a cloth from a mixture of two kinds of materials. So this is the law against shotness. Against what we say shotness, the Hebrew word here, is a mixture of blend. Now people say, well, what about a poly cotton blend, which is in almost everything? Look, the Torah is talking about something specific, which is putting a cloth that's a mixture of specifically wool and cotton. It's mixing the plant and animal kingdoms. Now, how do we know that? Because if you look at the context of what's actually being talked about, first of all, they didn't have polycotton blends. They didn't have fabrics made out of essentially petroleum products. They didn't have plastics and petroleum back then. So they didn't have it. But they're talking about mixing two realms that, again, are normally not supposed to be mixed. And what we see in the context is really talking about mixing species and what we would call maybe today genetic engineering. But in their day, we're talking about creating hybrids, which can be problematic. It is interesting because, again, is the Torah warning us against something that could actually be devastating to us one day, which is genetic engineering. If you ask people what are some of the biggest risks to humanity, one of them, honestly, is genetic engineering, or the creation of a virus or something that, you know, we will create ourselves that will wind up killing us. I mean, I don't want to scare people, but we have the capability. We already, every country that has, you know, any sense of wealth or power has developed, you know, biological weapons that could kill people on a massive scale.
Yes.
So if you don't think that this is real, you're completely, I mean, literally blinding yourself to the fact that of all the things that we could do to ourselves, this law might be the one that, if we really followed it, could save us. And I oftentimes wonder, you know, did someone go back in time to write this for us so that we don't do exactly what we're doing right now, which is create our own destruction, the seeds of our own destruction. So if a man has carnal relations with a woman who is a slave and has been designated for another man, but is not yet redeemed or given of freedom, there shall be an indemnity. They shall not, however, be put to death, since she has not been freed. But he must bring to the entrance of the tent of meeting as his guilt offering to the Lord a ram of guilt offering. With the ram of guilt offering, the priest shall make expiation for him before the Lord for the sin he committed, and for the sin that he committed will be forgiven him. And this is a law which, again, protects a woman who is in kind of a situation, well, protects the woman and it protects the man, because he's essentially taken a woman that is meant for another man, and essentially kind of created a situation where, for better words, there's no value to her as a wife, because he's essentially taking advantage of her. The Torah kind of like says, well, you'd think that that's almost a death penalty offense because it's not rape, but it's kind of taking advantage of somebody. And they say, no, there's a way to fix it. And the indemnity means that there's a financial penalty that he has to pay for doing this. So it's not, again, it could be that they both get killed, because it actually says they shall not be put to death, right? So the possibility is out there that that's what happens, because, as we're going to see, the penalty for sexual transgressions is death. Now it says, when you enter the land and plant any tree for food, you shall regard its fruit as forbidden. 3 years it shall be forbidden you, not to be eaten. In the 4th year, all its fruit shall be set aside for jubilation before the Lord. And only in the 5th year may you use its fruit, that its yield to you may be increased. I, the Lord, am your God. So this idea here is that you must set aside the fruit for the first few years. You're not allowed to eat it. You're not allowed to pick it, and eat it, because, again, you're going to stress the tree. And then finally in the 4th year, when this tree is finally kind of like ready to be picked, that fruit goes to the priests, it goes to the temple, and then in the 5th year, it's yours. So this is a way to protect the trees from being stressed. Again, we have this law, which we already heard, you shall not eat anything with its blood, which then goes to this, you shall not practice divination or soothsaying, which seems to be a little connected with the blood, which is that maybe the blood was also, again, used by pagans for rituals or 4 kind of practices of magic, which would then also be, again, those are prohibited, and the blood might actually lead to those practices. Now, here we get to some interesting physical practices. And I say physical practices because these are more grooming issues, but they are also connected with the practices of the Canaanites, which again, divination and soothsaying were regular practices that they did. You shall not round off the side growth of your head, which again is the word payah right there. You shall leave the payah of your head, not to cut the side growth, or destroy the side growth of your beard. You shall not make gashes in your flesh for the dead, or incise any marks on yourselves. I am the Lord. So there we have the law against incising your skin, any marks, which would again, according to Jewish tradition, include tattooing. Some people say it's not against all tattoos. It's against tattoos for the dead. Don't know. The context, you can make the argument, is that, but it also could be you don't make any gashes for the dead, and you also don't make any marks on yourselves. So this idea, again, what's the limits to it? Does it include, piercing your ears? Doesn't seem to. Rabbis did not prohibit, they permitted ear piercing. Nose piercing, even for that matter, doesn't seem to be prohibited. Areas where the skin could close back up, they don't seem to have an issue. But with areas that were permanent, they do have an issue. And so permanently marking your flesh was considered to be not a Jewish thing to do. And for a long time, it was not a Jewish thing to do. What broke that down to a large extent was men who served in the military, especially after, including World War II and beyond, when people started getting tattoos, even if they were Jewish, when they were in the military. Is it the only reason why? No, but it was the reason that most Jews for the first time came in contact with the practice of having tattoos, because it was not accepted. It was not normative behavior within the Jewish community. So people always ask the question, so if I have a tattoo, can I be buried in a Jewish cemetery? There is no law against specifically being buried in a Jewish cemetery. The issue was that people who got tattoos had oftentimes been seen as taking themselves out of the Jewish community. That's not the case today. Most people would say that they've not taken themselves out of the Jewish community by having the tattoo. They're not removing themselves in the sense that they don't see their action as a way of taking themselves out of the community. Tattooing has actually become very popular in Israel over the last 20 years. It wasn't for a long time. Israelis were kind of hesitant, even though they took on a lot of other popular traditions and Western traditions, if you will, including, again, when they went overseas to start eating and coming into contact with non-kosher meat and all different kinds of stuff. But tattooing was one of the last taboos that Israelis kind of moved into. They've definitely moved into it as well today, in the last 20 years. But again, from the context of what the rest of these chapters seem to be, is not to be behaving like the other people around them, to literally saying, we don't do that. That's not behavior that we engage in. The next line is, do not degrade your daughter and make her a harlot, lest the land fall into harlotry and the land be filled with depravity. And again, it's this understanding that, look, the pagans, the Canaanites, had no issue with their kids performing sexual. And again, the context here is sex for money, not necessarily even cultic prostitution, but they had no issue with either. Those were common activities. And so, look, the problem is it doesn't say here specifically, you're not allowed to go to a prostitute, but it does say you're not allowed to make your daughters prostitutes, which is why Israel had a real problem up until recently, and it's become less of a problem because they've cracked down on it. But Israel had a real problem with bringing in women from overseas, specifically from Eastern Europe, for the sex trade, because while it was seen as not acceptable to have your kids be prostitutes, bringing people in from Europe was allowed. And it was a problem because people realized it was hypocritical. It was also, quite frankly, preying on people, and it was sex trafficking. And Israel became not well respected for its allowance or participation or encouragement of it, because again, Israel doesn't have a law against prostitution. By the way, New York doesn't as of today either, by the way. In case you didn't read the news, prostitution is no longer going to be, sex workers are no longer, I don't want to say prostitution, sex workers will no longer, as of today, be, they will no longer be tried for sex, for prostitution. Done. They can still try men and they can still try sex trafficking, but they will no longer try sex workers. Just today. New York joins Philadelphia and some other major city, I can't remember which, that has now taken that off the books. And it's this weird kind of reaction that we have to it today, which is that we're not going to punish the women, but we will punish the men, and we'll punish the people who are responsible. And Israel had the similar reaction to it over the years, which was we're not going to permit and allow pimps or madams to engage in sex trafficking and in forcing people into prostitution. But if people are going to engage in prostitution, then we're not going to try them. But Israel had a horrible problem with women that were being brought into the country clearly for sex, and unfortunately was being run by the Russian mafia, which was very powerful for a long time in Israel, for about 20 years, and has since, I wouldn't say they're not powerful anymore, but they've definitely cracked down on the sex trade in Israel because they had I don't know if it was a big problem. I don't want to say it was a huge problem, but it was a bad problem. Numerically, it was bad enough. And if it was happening to one woman who was being trafficked into the country, it was an embarrassment. So Israel complied with the American law on that, and is now much more careful with women who are being brought into the country on passports that they believe are falsified.
You do a plank right now.
So that is an important distinction that, again, the Torah seems to be dealing with fathers who in particular are selling their children into the sex trade. Now, the last parts of this: you shall keep my Sabbaths and venerate my sanctuary. I am the Lord. Do not turn to ghosts. Do not inquire of familiar spirits to be defiled by them. I am the Lord your God. It does not say that you can't talk. It doesn't say that ghosts don't exist. It says you don't talk to ghosts. So people always ask me, does Judaism believe in ghosts? I don't know, but you're not supposed to talk to them. You're not supposed to engage. You're not supposed to try to talk to ghosts. You're not supposed to engage in seances and things like that to try to get ghosts to do your will, or what we call familiar spirits, which would be using demons or angels or other types of things to try to use magic.
And don't fool around with the Ouija board.
Correct.
Okay.
You shall rise before the aged and show deference to the old. You shall fear your God. I am the Lord. And there again is another, kind of like not necessarily connected right before, necessarily to it, but again, to respect those who are older than you. When a stranger resides with you in the land, you shall not wrong him, which is a very interesting law, very forward-thinking law, which is that we don't take advantage of the people who are not citizens in our land, right? The people who are, again, strangers or people who are non-Israelites. The stranger who resides with you shall be one of your citizens. You shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord. And again, if you think that where the law just said you shall love your neighbor as yourself, the law here also now says you shall love the ger, you shall love the stranger kamocha as yourself. Because again, your experience in the land of Egypt taught you that. You shall not falsify measures of length, weight, or capacity. So not using false weights. You shall have an honest balance, honest weights, an honest ephah, and an honest hin. All again, these weights of measurement.
Mhm.
This is, all these words are right. Moznei tzedek, avnei tzedek. Those are just, righteous, or honest. And understanding that tzedek is balanced, right? So when they use scales, those are must be balanced, right? And that is what tzedek is represented by, the scales of justice. I, the Lord, am your God who freed you out of the land of Egypt. You shall faithfully observe all my laws and all my rules. I am the Lord. And there is one final chapter, chapter 20, which now goes back to the sexual prohibitions, and now, interestingly, gives us a penalty for those things. So, slightly different order. And people have pointed out, we had the prohibitions. Now, why do we have chapter 20? And again, the rabbis pointed out a long time ago, yeah, we told you not to do it. And now if you do it, this is what happens. And so it's caution. It's said flat out not to do it. And now we're going to tell you what happens if you do. The Lord spoke to Moses. And this is what we finish with today. Say further to the Israelite people, anyone among the Israelites or among the strangers residing in the land of Israel, which again, you're treating them as yourself, you're loving them, which means they got to follow your rules, which, by the way, real important part of our today's discussion for today, for our country, for everyone. Look, if you're going to have people who are not going to be citizens in your country and you treat them with respect, they got to follow your laws. You can't have it both ways. You can't have these people here and not hold them accountable for the law. You're loving them, you're taking care of them, and they need to respect and take care of you, and they need to respect your laws. Say further to the Israelites, you can't forget that part. Anyone among the Israelites or among the strangers residing in Israel, so again, they have to follow these laws too, who gives any of his offspring to Molech shall be put to death. The people of the land shall pelt him with stones. So there again, any of those people are offering up their children to Molech, to this God, to these foreign gods. And I will set my face against the man and cut him off from among his people, because he gave his offspring to Molech. And so he defiled my sanctuary and profaned my holy name. It's as if he desecrated the temple.
Mm-hmm.
And if the people of the land shut their eyes to that man when he gives his offspring to Moloch, and should not put him to death, I myself will set my face against that man and his skin, and I will cut off from among the people both him and all who follow him in going astray after Molech. And if any person turns to ghosts and familiar spirits and goes astray after them, I will set my face against that person and cut him off from among his people. So there we return back to what we finished with, which is laws about behaving like those people and engaging in idolatry and in worship of ghosts and worship of using spirits and those kinds of things. And then it turns back to this: you shall sanctify yourselves and be holy, for I, the Lord, am your God. Again, this idea of hitem kedoshim, you're supposed to be holy. You shall faithfully observe my laws. I, the Lord, make you holy. Now we get back to family relations. So we heard you're supposed to revere your parents. Now, if anyone insults his father or mother, he shall be put to death. He has insulted his father and his mother, and his blood guilt is upon him. So that is a pretty strict law. and it says we're supposed to revere them in the previous portion. No, look what happens if you don't. Previous chapter. You are put to death if you insult them. If a man commits adultery with a married woman, committing adultery with another man's wife, the adulterer and the adulteress shall be put to death. So we didn't have a flat out adultery, like it said adultery. It said don't have sex with your neighbor's wife. Here it's saying specifically adultery. And that is a punishment with death. Now, if a man lies with his father's wife, it is the nakedness of his father that he has uncovered. The two of them should be put to death. Their blood guilt is upon him. So again, it went back to the way chapter 18 began, with lying with your father's wife. It doesn't say your mother, it says your father's wife, which would include your mother and your stepmother. If a man lies with his daughter-in-law, both of them shall be put to death. They have committed incest. Their blood guilt is upon them. So that's the law of, so it's almost like they did your mother's, your father and mother, that direction, and then that direction, your children. And now we have the law coming back to the homosexuality issue. And so the line there said it's a toeva. But here it says, if a man lies with a male as one lies with a woman, the two of them have done an abhorrent thing, the toeva, and they shall be put to death. Their blood guilt is upon them. So there it says flat out that you're supposed to kill them. If a man marries a woman and her mother, it is depravity. Both he and they shall be put to the fire. There shall be no depravity amongst you. And then it gets back to bestiality law. If a man has carnal relations with a beast, he shall be put to death, and you shall kill the beast. If a woman approaches any beast to mate with it, you shall kill the woman and the beast. They shall be put to death, and their blood guilt is upon them. Now, people have pointed out before, that doesn't seem fair that the animal has to be put to death. Assumedly, the animal didn't really have any say in this. And so people felt it wasn't fair to punish the animal. So that has been, the point has been made before. And you know, the rabbis knew this point, and they answered it by saying, look, the problem is that the animal will always represent that sin. And so rather than having an animal that was a constant reminder of that depravity, you have to rid yourself of the animal too. So there's a kind of understanding that, again, it's not fair, it's not right, it's not, maybe not what we would like to do, but we have no choice. And it's consistent with the fact that the partners in all these relationships, both partners, are being killed. The question of whether did they equally have culpability in this relationship, we have to say if it's rape, if it's a case of rape, you don't kill the person that was raped. But if it's a consensual relationship, the Torah is saying that both parties are killed, which, again, it's pretty strict. And you'd say, well, yeah, but we already heard this. Torah says, no, if you didn't pay attention to it, you were warned. And if the warning doesn't catch you, if the warning by itself saying don't do it doesn't catch you, there's a warning with a punishment that should get you.
So all the arguments against the death penalty are defied by our Bible, by the Torah.
I would say I don't know if all the arguments were, but the issue of what most people and many people will use as the arguments against it. Yeah, the primary one, which is that it's not a deterrent, is a problem, because the Torah essentially concedes that people will not listen to a warning unless there's a punishment attached. Right. And that's the interesting thing, that it's not like they're far apart. It's not like it's in a different book of the Bible. it's in the same Torah portion. I mean, it's a joint portion this year, but it's chapter 18 and 20, and they're right there next to each other. You can't, people forget that they're even different portions because they're so close together. They think it's there once. No, it's there once without a punishment, and then it's there again just 2 chapters later with a punishment.
Mhm.
If a man marries his sister, the daughter of his father or mother, so that he sees her nakedness and she sees his nakedness, it is a disgrace. He shall be excommunicated in the sight of their kinsfolk. He has uncovered the nakedness of his sister. He shall bear his guilt. Now, people say, well, this is weird because the other relationships, the punishment was death. This one's not. And clearly, it's not a good punishment. It's a horrible punishment, but it's not death. It's not the final punishment. And so people say, why is that? Like, why is there a difference? And I will tell you, the traditional explanation is because in all the other relationships, you have an intergenerational problem. And in this relationship, as bad as it is, it's a linear relationship. It's a relationship.
There's an equality.
Yeah. And because of that, it's seen as, I'm not saying it's not problematic, but I think it's fair to say it must be less problematic because the punishment isn't as final as the other ones. And it goes with the next law, which is also not a final one. If a man lies with a woman in her infirmity and uncovers her nakedness, which again, infirmity is a translation for it, but maybe not the best. He has laid bare her flow and she has exposed her blood flow, which again, there you see the word blood pointed out. Both of them shall be cut off from among their people. So that's the punishment for sexual relationships during menstruation. It's not death, but it is, Achrei, it is being cut off. And we're almost done, by the way. So I know we're a little over, but we're almost done. I told you, it's quite a portion. There's quite a lot here. Quite a lot to unpack. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your mother's sister or your father's sister, for that is laying one's own flesh. They shall bear their guilt. If a man lies with their uncle's wife, it is his uncle's nakedness that he has uncovered. They shall bear their guilt. They shall die childless. If a man marries the wife of his brother, it is indecency. It is the nakedness of his brother that he has uncovered. They shall remain childless. Let me just finish. This is the end of the prohibited relationships, which again, these relationships, while again being intergenerational, are also not as problematic from the standpoint of upending the intergenerational flow of life, and probably also not common, but not encouraged. Let's put it that way. And again, it finishes with these laws, or this summary of the laws. You shall faithfully observe all my laws and all my regulations, lest the land to which I bring you to settle and spew you out. You shall not follow the practices of the nation that I'm driving out before you, for it is because they did all these things that I abhorred them. And said to you, you shall possess their land, or I will give it to you to possess, a land flowing with milk and honey. I, the Lord, am your God, who has set you apart from other peoples. So you shall set apart the clean beast from the unclean bird from the clean. You shall not draw abomination upon yourselves through beast or bird or anything with which the ground is alive, for which I have set you apart for you to treat as unclean. You shall be holy to me. I, the Lord, am holy, for I have set you apart from the other peoples to be mine. A man or a woman who has a ghost or familiar spirit shall be put to death. They shall be pelted with stones. Their blood guilt shall be upon them. The end. So,
that's the witches thing. You can kill witches and stuff.
Yep. And so that's what we end with. So the punishment, we were warned against it before. Now, once again, we come back to the punishment. And so again, this is the law, and this is why witchcraft was seen as such a problem, and why the punishment will oftentimes be stoning for witches, because it's based on the biblical commandment to stone witches. Again, these are problems that people, for Israel, this idea of, again, not being like the practices of the other nations. So what, the full context of this is, as we saw, as it's been repeated, is that the other nations, the Canaanites, those peoples were behaving like this. They were doing all these things. And that's, God says, that's why I kicked them out. Now you could say, well, God, you promised us the land. You promised our ancestors the land. And the reality is that there is both things working here, which is that the land was promised to our ancestors, but to some extent, the people also needed to be thrown out because they had done such terrible things that God said, I'm not going to let them be there anymore. If they were entitled to the land, you might say, well, then who are we to kick them out? God's saying, no, they're not entitled to the land, and I'm giving it to you. And there's an understanding that it was only after they had broken all of these laws that the Canaanites had engaged in this behavior and have had more than ample opportunity to turn back and do the right thing. They're so engaged in these practices that's when Israel is allowed to come in and take possession of it and to make it their land. Not just because Abraham and Isaac, Jacob were promised it, but because these Canaanites had behaved so poorly that they needed to be driven out. Do we know that they were? Well, yeah, because we have the stories of Sodom and Gomorrah. We knew that they were already engaging in that behavior back in Abraham's time. We know that during the time of Jacob, that Shechem, either raped her or took Dinah against her will. So we know that we know that the Canaanites are doing these things because the Bible's told us it, and God has told us it. So we're saying, okay, God, we understand. And we are using this as a cautionary tale so that we don't become like the people that got kicked out. Is there a historical analogy to today with Israel? No, I mean, that's not even the point anymore, because whether or not the Arab peoples that were living there were engaging in that behavior, nobody says that they are. Nobody says that the Arabs or the Turks who were living there before. That's not the argument that's made, because we would say, it's our land because God said thousands of years ago that this is our land, and that, again, the relationship that we have with it is to take care of it, to behave properly in it, and to make sure that we're living a holy life, because it says, God says, I am making you a people set apart from other people. I am asking you, I'm telling you, I'm demanding of you, think about what you're doing, think about your behavior, and understand that you are not, your excuse can't be, well, everybody else is doing it.
Oh.
And that's why Judaism, to some extent, has this burden, and to some extent, I do think, a double standard, because we can't expect people to respect us and to value what Judaism has given to the world unless we live by the laws, and also, again, make sure that we're not falling back into an excuse that everybody else is doing it, so it's okay for us to do it. Which is, again, one of the things that I find challenging about when people say, well, Israel is doing what other countries are, the Israelis are doing what other people are doing. I say no, because we do expect more from ourselves, and we're not going to use that as an excuse. We're not going to say, well, Israel can do this because everybody else is doing it. We're going to say, no, we're going to expect more from ourselves, and we're going to expect, you could say, we're going to expect more from Jews in America too. And I do expect more from our people. And it's one of the reasons why when we see Jews who behave improperly and do bad things, that it's upsetting to us.
Right.
I say this obviously as we remember the fact that, we saw one of the worst examples of Jewish behavior, a well-known Jew who was a horrible thief and a horrible person who died 1 week ago today. And I'm talking obviously about Bernie Madoff, but this is a abhorrent thing for us to have a person who behaves so unethically and so criminally, who ended up costing billions of dollars to people. And especially, by the way, I want to remind people, especially to the Jewish community, because most of the community that he robbed were not Gentile. Most of the people he robbed were other Jews, just so you know. So there are definitely cases of Jews who've run Ponzi schemes and who've taken advantage of people from lots of communities. But the reality is the biggest damage that this man did was to his own community. And of course, as you know, his brother went to jail for 10 years and is since now is out of jail, but both of his sons died. His son, Mark, committed suicide, and his other son, Andrew, died of cancer. So when we talk about the punishment that children have from their fathers, understand that that's what happened. And I want you to know it's unfair. It's not, we talked about it a couple of weeks ago. The sins of the father are on the children. Understand that his sons are the ones who turned him in. And so as tragic as the whole story is, they were not excusing their father's behavior. And so we understand that we have a responsibility as Jews to not only do better, but to understand that there's a generational, intergenerational responsibility that we have as parents and grandparents to expect our children to behave well, and also, quite frankly, for our parents to behave better too. And it all starts from our family. As these chapters taught us, it starts in the family. Starts in Aaron's family, it starts in every family, and it emanates out to the rest of the world. But if we don't have family purity and family health is what it's called in Hebrew, it's taharat mishpacha, it's the family purity issues, then we can't expect our community or our country to be holy. So it all starts there. And again, there's a lot, we digested a lot today. Again, in other years, we only have to read half the portion each, half of what we just read. We read just next year, we read Achrei mode, and next year we read Kedoshim. And again, Mike Schwartz, we didn't make you chant your Haftarah, your Maftir. We didn't make you.
I appreciate that, Rabbi.
We didn't make you do that. And again, I do want to start reminding people because again, last week we were celebrating Israel Independence Day and Yom HaSmut.
Real quick though, I have a quick question.
Yeah, sure, please.
Is my Hebrew birthday would have been a couple weeks ago.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Why is this portion this week and not 4 weeks ago?
Because your Hebrew birth date, this might have been let's see, what day's your Hebrew birth date?
I'm gonna get to that right now. Give me a second.
Okay. And by the way, today again is the 24th day of the Omer. It's the 3.5 weeks. We're almost at Lag BaOmer. In about a week, we'll be at Lag BaOmer, a little over a week, technically. But in 2 weeks, next week for Lag BaOmer, the 33rd day of the Omer is one of the days that, again, the Omer period is a serious period, a period of reflection, but it means that in a few weeks, we're kind of midway through today. And in about 3.5 weeks, we'll have Shavuot, which again, we're doing together with Congregation Beth Shalom on May 16th, and we're going to be doing that live.
And my Hebrew birthday is the 14th of Nisan.
So my guess, my friend, Mike Schwartz, is that that your birthday
is tomorrow.
14th of Nisan. No, 14th of Nisan. I
right.
know your English birthday. 14th of Nisan is the first day of Passover. So my guess is,
wow, that was that late in 1959 then?
my guess is that your parents did not want you to have your bar mitzvah during Passover. So my guess is that
No,
was
I had my birthday on. I had my bar mitzvah on my birthday in '72.
yeah, but not on your Hebrew date.
No.
No, but that you asked. So why is it different?
No.
That's my guess is if they wanted to hold it on your Hebrew birthday, then it would have been the first night of Passover.
Gotcha.
I
Right.
think that it was your parents' decision not to have your bar mitzvah during Passover.
Right.
Again, I'm assuming that they looked at the Hebrew date. The rabbi looked at it and said, "No, don't make this kid have his bar mitzvah during Passover." Actually, in all seriousness, most synagogues in didn't allow bar mitzvahs to even be during on the Chag. So
Right.
they wouldn't have done it. It was not an option. We wouldn't have done it on we've never done a bar mitzvah on Chag. So happy birthday to you, Mike. And this is anniversary of your bar mitzvah too. This is
Yeah, I'll be 44 tomorrow.
we have a chance next year. We just made a bar mitzvah. We just made a bat mitzvah date for Sophia. So for Sophia Levine, who's going to have her bat mitzvah next year for Achrei mode, you can be her tutor. No, but it's actually very cool that you're called to the Torah, and that was a good anniversary. So everybody, again, please stay healthy and positive. And again, we had a wonderful dinner last night, and Mike was there, and
It was fun.
I don't know who else was there from who's on right now. There's a
My
couple.
next door neighbor was there.
Facebook, your next door neighbor. That's right. Stay back there. We had a wonderful turnout. Actually, I really think it was a great turnout. So it was indicative of the fact that I do think people do want to be together. They at least want to eat together. But we had a really good time. It was nice to see people in person. It made us. I think all of us made me happy, and I know we got really good feedback from people who loved seeing everybody in person. So as much as we look forward to again studying and being
I
able
want to know where Cheryl and Dave were. I thought for sure they'd show up.
for Taco Tuesday. The tacos were good. I don't think they were worth coming from Texas for. I know you have good tacos in Texas, but we had a really good time. So thank you everybody for being on tonight and for again joining us in studying Torah. Ve'ahavta l'recha kamocha. Remember to love each other and to love our neighbors and to treat each other with respect and with care. So take care, everybody. It's good to see you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Wonderful
Bye.
class.
Thank you,
Beautiful
everybody.
class. Thank you.
Bye-bye. We'll see you soon.